Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Welcome. Thank you for joining this week's virtual discovery classroom. I'm your moderator, Megan Selva, the Jill Abrahamson Environmental Education Intern. I'm glad to be here with you again. At this time, we cannot walk the trails together, but in Archbold's discovery classroom, we can still enjoy outdoor learning. Today, Dustin, the Director of Education, will be streaming live outside in the field to give us a fun and interactive talk about our local watershed and wetlands. What is a wetland, you might ask? Well, stay tuned and you'll find out. Today we have two special guests that will help you answer your questions. And we'd love to see where everyone is and where you're from. So if you could share your name and city or state in the chat, that way everyone can see who is participating in today's webinar. Let's turn it over to Dustin and learn about how our local watershed and the headwaters of the Florida Everglades are so important. Hi, Dustin.
Hey, nice job, Megan. Good to see everybody on here. I saw a few names that I recognized in the attendees list. I am coming to you live out in the field at Archbold Biological Station in Venus, Florida. I am filming from the south end of the Lake Wales Ridge. If you don't know what that is, it's the big old sandy old island. It's a big sand dune in the middle of the state, and Archbold is located on the south end. If you've been to Archbold before and been to our main campus with the buildings and the parking lots, right now I'm about 4 miles south of there in a pretty remote part of the station that's a restricted area just for the researchers to come out here. It is about 85 degrees out right now. I've got an umbrella here that I'm using right now. My nice blue umbrella. And I've got a cooler with an ice pack to protect my phone. If I get knocked off because my phone overheats, don't worry. We have two amazing guests that are helping us out today, two Archbold researchers. If I get knocked out, that'll just jump right on. Our theme today is, well, it's actually kind of two things, right? Watersheds and wetlands. Let's take a moment to define what a watershed is, and a little later we'll get into some details on it. If you know what a watershed is, type it down on your chat or put it in the comments on Facebook. What is a watershed? Is it another funny name for an outhouse? Is it a building where you store water? What is a watershed? I see some honest answers. I do not know. Well, a watershed is an area of land where the water in that land flows to the same place. It's pretty simple, but they can be small, they can be really big. Sometimes they're flowing to lakes, sometimes they're flowing out to the ocean. No matter where you are on the planet, you're in a watershed. And it's really important. It's not just this scientific fact to know. It's really important because you share that watershed with the other people that live in it, as well as all the plants and the animals. We'll show you some maps in a little while showing where Archbold falls in there. I just wanted to start with that. What is a watershed? So now you know. I am in a beautiful, just gorgeous spot right here. I'm going to turn my camera around so you can all take a look at it. The other part of our theme today is wetlands. I am in a wetland right now. I want you to have a chance to practice some observation skills. So I'll turn my camera around and just show you this beautiful view that I've got. Let's see some I noticed statements in the chat. I just told you I'm in a wetland. So get that in your head, like, ooh, what would a wetland look like? And let's see some observations. What do we notice about this wetland? Trying to keep it straight. I'm gonna point it right down to my feet too. Coming down, right down to my feet. There's definitely something I'm noticing about this wetland. I wore my boots today, but they're not getting very wet. The first thing that I notice about wetlands in April is that they're not very wet. I've got my boots on here and they look totally dry right now. And I walked across this whole wetland to get out to this spot right here and didn't even get wet. There are some muddy spots, but a lot of it is pretty just hard packed. There's some spots that are real sandy, other parts that have soil that's a rich dark brown or dark black soil. The one thing in front of me here is super cool, and I didn't show it to you earlier. I'll switch this back around again, and if you know what this is, type it down in the chat. When you imagine that you are an animal living out here, and it's pretty dry, you might look for a little spot like this where some animal has dug it up and created, no, it's pretty dark, let's see if you can see in there, created a still muddy that still has a little bit of water here. What animal would have done this? We need something nice and big. Nope, not a frog. We need something bigger than a frog. Hey, there we go. Gail, she got it, an alligator. This is an alligator hole behind me. And right now I don't think there's a gator in there. I've been walking around out here for the last half an hour. In Florida, in this part of Florida, we get about 55 inches of rain a year. That's a lot of rain, but almost all of it comes in the summertime. In the winter, which we're just at the end of now, and the spring, it's dry. But alligators are architects. They can survive in these wetlands by burrowing down like this, digging these gator holes. That becomes a refuge for other animals too. Now this one's pretty small, but sometimes they'll be bigger than this. And you can have amphibians living in there, some fish living in there. I don't know exactly how down deep this one goes, but I had a stick earlier I was poking it with, and I couldn't really find the bottom. It was just pretty mushy and muddy sticking it in there. So they can get down, yeah, underneath the vegetation where it's cooler and wet. We don't have our gator here today, but we're gonna pull up a video so you can see what I'm talking about. One of our researchers, actually our guest researcher today, Amanda, was out here a few weeks ago and actually got this video. Megan, can you pull that video up? So sometimes she comes out here to check the water level in this pond. She actually comes out every 2 weeks to check the water level in this pond. And I don't know if this was 2 weeks ago or a month ago, but it was sometime recently. There it is.
Can I hear this
That's
noise?
our same spot right here.
Yep.
And
Distance.
it's about a 6-foot long gator that was living right in here.
That hole has to be 6 feet at least. So you measure an alligator
Oh, there's her.
based on the distance between the eyeballs and the nostrils. So let's see if she gets really mad if I move a little bit. So you can see that that's at least 6 inches. So she's reaching maturity. If it's a she, if it's a he, he's got a little bit longer to go. until he's sexually mature. But yeah, that hole's got to be at least 6 feet for the alligator to curl all the way up in there, and I didn't even see it.
Pretty cool, right? Megan, let's pull the slides back up. We've got some maps here showing you the headwaters and showing you some watersheds. And I'll keep an eye out for gators while I'm out here. This is from a website from the United States Geological Survey. Anybody can do this. You go to their website and you can click on the region of the country that you live in. And as you click, it'll zoom in further and further and show you where the water goes in your area. So let's click on the southeast, which has the Archbold logo there, and we'll start to zoom in. Already we can see the southeast is divided into many different watersheds. Let's keep going closer to that Archbold logo. Now we're starting to get close. That big lake there that's in the middle, that's Lake Okeechobee. Big, huge lake in the south part of the state. That lake is the mother of the Everglades. And south of the lake is what people call the Everglades. The national park is right on the bottom of it. But let's click up by that logo again, get a little closer. Here we go. All three of these sections it's showing here, that is the headwaters of the Everglades. That's where we are in Archbold. So what do I mean by that? This is 2.6 million acres here, and all of that is flowing to Lake Okeechobee. But what you can see is, even though it's one headwaters that's all flowing the same place, it has different sub-basins in there. In fact, this map is simplified. We have another map at Archbold, maybe we'll show you at the end when we do questions, that shows there's over 50 different little sub-watersheds inside of this one. But I love this. Take a look at how the logo is right on top of that green line. Right now, I'm at the south part of our property, which means that the pond here, if it gets a lot of rain, the water is going to move slowly south of here and then go to a creek and head to Lake Okeechobee. But if I was at the Francis Archbold Hufty Learning Center, where my office normally is, and it rained there, the water would actually flow north. So the water on part of Archbold goes north to Lake Placid and Lake June, and then Lake Istapoga, and then it goes to Lake Okeechobee. So even on one property, you can have water that's going in different directions depending on what spot you're in. Like I said before, this isn't just learning facts. We share this watershed with other people and other animals, plants. So if you learn about water quality problems with pollution in the water, or algae blooms, or fish that are dying, and bad stuff like that, you can't just look at the spot it's happening. You got to think about the whole thing. Okay, we are ready for our first poll question. We're going to pop up a poll question for all of you to answer, and then we'll have Amanda, our guest speaker, come on to answer it for you. I'll turn my video off.
All right, so our first poll question is, how many seasonal ponds are on Archbold's main property? A, 212, B, 512, C, 812, or D, 1012. And this is a pretty hard question, but it looks like some got it correct. Our next guest who's going to answer that for us is Amanda West. Amanda West got her master's from in ecohydrology, the study of water and ecosystems, and has been with Archbold since 2018. She monitors the seasonal ponds and groundwater and has conducted amphibian and fish sampling in the seasonal wetlands. She's joining us from her home. Hey, Amanda, can you hear us? Thank you for joining us today.
Can you hear me?
I Can, yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm just gonna talk to you guys real fast. Dustin's gonna show you what we do sampling our seasonal ponds every other week. We've been doing this since 1989, so it was 20 years last year of sampling how deep the water is in these ponds. And the number of ponds on the main station, there's 812 of them. And that's not including ponds that are on our ranch site or on our reserve restoration site. So we have quite a few seasonal ponds. What is a seasonal pond? A seasonal pond basically means it's a pond that is filled up for a season, for a couple of seasons. Another scientific word for this is ephemeral, with an E, ephemeral ponds, versus a permanent pond. So you could imagine if you've got, oh, you don't have the map up anymore, Megan, but the whole map of Archbold Station, any kind of lake, Lake Istapoga, Lake, thank you. The lake on the north side, there's our Lake Annie, Lake Okeechobee, those would be called permanent ponds, or they get bigger, they go called lakes. And a ephemeral pond, a seasonal pond, is only filled when there's enough water to fill it. Now, the cool thing about Florida is that all our ponds are made out of sand. How many of you guys have been to the beach and you pick up a bucket from the ocean and you pour it for the moat on your sandcastle? And what happens half the time? It goes straight down into that sand, it disappears. And you're like, oh man, and you got to go just get enough water to fill it up, right? So question I have for you guys is, where do you think Archbold gets the water to fill our ponds? Yeah, the blue on the maps is all our wetlands. We went and like outlined them all and made like a map on the on GIS so that we could track them. So Archbold isn't near the ocean, so we don't get any water from the ocean, right? We actually, because we are the headwaters of the Everglades, we don't have any rivers or streams that feed into us. We feed the streams and rivers because we are at the headwaters. That's what that means. So most of our water is gonna come from, let's see, rain. And there's the second source. You guys know what the second source of our water is? It's very, very important here in Florida. So, sorry, I gotta click. You guys are all chatting and I can't turn my TV. There we go. So, this is my sandbox. This is to demonstrate Florida. And what we have down here, the bottom of the sandbox, we're gonna pretend is called the hard pan. So especially here in Central Florida, we have what's called a hard pan. And it's very hard for the water to flow through it. So what happens is our rain comes down and it soaks up in the sand like this. Let me show you. Okay, and it soaks up in the sand and it goes down, but then it'll hit that hard pan and it won't be able to go down any further. And because of that, the water will collect in the ground. And that's what we call groundwater. And once you have enough water collecting in the ground, the water level will actually, so it's starting here, and the more water you add via rain, the more the water comes up and up and up and up. And so what I have here, we're gonna do, I made us a little wetland here. Can you see it's a little depression? And then I've got some high sides here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna keep simulating that we have water, that we have rainwater coming into the system here. And you can see this water is disappearing into the sand. It's just going away. Where's it going? Well, it's going down into the sand and it's gonna fill up all the little spaces between each sand particle until all the little spaces are full. And once all the little spaces are full, then it's gonna start up. So while this happens, Dustin's gonna show you how we measure the depth of those ponds throughout the year.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. She's gonna keep adding water to that. While she does, I have right here, this is a water gauge. Some of our ponds have water gauges in them. If we had come back to the same spot in August, say, we have a regular year with a regular amount of rain in it, this might be up way up here somewhere on my stomach or close to my chest. That's how much water can end up out here. dry this time of year, and then you gotta come and wade out here if you're here in the late summer. Let's get a little closer so we can read these here. Archbold is a science organization, which means we use the metric system. So when you see the numbers here, this is in centimeters, 60, 70, 80. Let's go all the way down. Now if you can see all the way to the bottom there, here's 20. All the way down there, I can see 10. And actually, I'm noticing something kind of interesting, which is that I can't see all the way to 0. Even though this is not wet, I actually don't see the 0. There's a couple reasons that might have happened. When these gauges are put out here, they're here for years and years. Sometimes animals might move around the soil around here and change it, or maybe this pole has sunk in a little deeper over the years. Mandy is aware of that, and when she's checking these gauges, she's always also keeping track of that, so she can look here and see how high the water is, and then subtract how much of the gauge is actually under the ground. And if I look right now, I can see 10, 9, 8, 7. So 7 centimeters of this is buried right now under the ground, and she would subtract that if she was out here recording. So one other thing I want to show you before I turn it back over to Mandy, which is just all this soil that I've got here. I was talking about how the gator holes are a refuge for animals because it's still wet. But here's another cool thing. Some of the animals out here, they've adapted for having dry conditions and wet conditions. So even though it might look like there's not much happening in the soil, if you came out here and you scooped up this into some bags and brought it home, then put it in a tub with some water, you'd start to see little tiny critters hatching out of here. In fact, one of our interns just a few years ago, she discovered a new species of fairy shrimp. By doing that, she'd go around to the ponds and just dig some out and bring it back to her lab. In fact, she drives I think she's still doing it. She drives all over Florida and goes into ditches and scoops up the soil. The fairy shrimp lay eggs, and this can dry up here and the egg is fine. In fact, it could be dry for years and years and years. Nobody knows the limit. 20 years, 50 years, they don't know. And then if you get rain and this seasonal pond gets wet again, those fairy shrimp will hatch again. Pretty darn amazing. I'm going to turn it back over to Mandy.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. So can you guys see? My wetland got full. You see that? Look at that. So let me add some more water here so you guys can watch it get filled. So what this means is it's called saturated. My soil is now saturated with water. There's so much water in the soil that it's now building itself up. See it coming here? That soil's so wet that it's flowing into there. So this is how most of Archbold's ponds hold their water. Their actual water level is very similar to the amount of water that's actually in the soil. And so the rain over the whole landscape is going to drain into the sand, and it'll raise the water level for the entire landscape. And this is how we get our wetlands. Bloop, 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 bloop. There we go. I also wanted to show you guys an example, I hope this works, of a watershed. So when I was in school and I learned about watersheds, I thought they were really cool. Watersheds can be of any size, like Dustin said, and we number them from like 1 to 10. And so like there's tiny little like number 10 watersheds within a big number 1 watershed. And so you can imagine, let's pretend this is like a mountain range, right? Like let's say you're out west where there's actually like topography. And it's gonna rain on the landscape, right? Now see how the water is flowing on both sides of the mountain shed? See that? Now what that means is this is one edge of the watershed. The water is shedding down. This is the other edge of the watershed. So a little guy Mickey Mouse could live here, and somebody else could live over here. And depending upon the rocks and the way the water flows, they could get different amounts of water. See how the water wants to go more toward Mickey Mouse and not as much toward the other way? This is how we can get deserts just on the other side of mountains. It's how we can have different ecosystems occurring. In Florida, our watersheds don't have really cool mountain peaks that divide them. Instead, it's just very slight elevations that cause the water to choose to float toward gravity one way or the other. And so that's what we mean by a watershed. So when you're driving around, you might not actually be able to see where a watershed starts and ends, but the USGS and all the people who make maps can measure the ground and the different elevations that occur and be able to figure out exactly where that line is that the water chooses to go one way or the other way. I also wanted to say one more thing about, I also monitor the groundwater as well. How do you guys think I monitor groundwater? It's in the ground. It was backwards. It's kind of confusing. It's really interesting and tricky. What we do is we have wells. So wells are not like made out of bricks and people fall down them. They are made out of PVC pipes like this. Even the professionals make them out of PVC pipes. And the PVC pipe goes into the ground. This end gets flush with the ground, and I just stick a little measuring tape down there, and I measure how far down the water is from the level of the ground. And if there's really fancy machines that have little like corks on them, little floats, and they will automatically take, like the float stays on top of the water, and so they'll take the water level at whatever time you want it to take, and you can get like either water levels on a day, water levels every 15 minutes, water levels every week, and those are called lysimeters if you want to look them up. But that's at Archbold proper, we go out and measure it by hand. On our ranch property, we do have lysimeters, and we're able to measure those and put them into the computer right away. So that's pretty cool. By monitoring the water in the ground and then also measuring the water that's on the landscape, that tells us how the wildlife is supporting itself, because as you can imagine where Dustin is right now, very dry, and it gets very dry in the dry season, and that groundwater is very important so that the plants can continue to have a water, and the wildlife can continue to have a food as well. So that's why we've been monitoring it for a really long time, and we hope to continue to do it as well into the future. So thank you, Dustin.
Yeah, that's great, Mandy. That was really cool. I started walking away from the part that is normally the deeper part of this pond to the shallower part that has regular sugar sand like you'd see in the scrub, and I found a little friend. I'm gonna turn my camera around and see if you can find him. So when I was walking, I saw him and I went, ooh, and I got down close, and then he disappeared. Whoa, where did he go? He's got a little hidey hole. So we'll see if you can find him. We're gonna come down. Gonna look in this little hole right here. Might be too dark in there to see it. Can you see what's in there? It might be too dark. All right, I'm gonna scoop my little friend out here. Hold on. Come here, buddy. There he is. I've got an oak toad. Oh, I just lost him. Darn it. He just jumped off. There he is. Their little oak toad friend right here. Oak toads have a stripe that goes down their back. Looks like a little pine needle on their back. So they're very well camouflaged. We're gonna pull up our next poll question. We've got another guest, and those of you who have done summer camp at Archbold will remember our next guest. So let's pull that, let's get that poll up there for everyone. I'll turn my video off.
Okay, so the next poll is, and the last poll, what system services? A military group that protects rare habitats, dead trees, housing woodpeckers, lawn mowing services of your home, or nature's free gifts that benefit humans. And I'll give you a couple seconds. And our next guest, oh, okay. Got a lot of people saying nature's gifts that benefit humans. All right, so our next guest is, let me put the slide, Alan Rebadow. He is a research assistant at Old Buck Island Ranch. Alan assists with many projects on the ranch, including data collection for the ranch's water structures. Sorry, hold on. He also has a long history with Archbold Biological Station. He served as a high school intern with the plant lab. He also interned with Archbold Education Department and research assistant for the Herpetology and Restoration Ecology Department. Hi, Alan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. All right. You want to go ahead and bring up that slide for me? The
Sure.
presentation. So we're going to just talk about a few types of water issues we have in South Florida, and all these have to do with how we've altered the watershed over time. One of them being water flow, and one of them being water quality. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so you have two photos there. The first photo is how the Everglades watershed originally flowed. And historically, it sat in the Kissimmee River. All the rainwater would sit in the Kissimmee River, or the Kissimmee floodplain. And it would move real slow all the way down to Lake Okeechobee. Then it would move slowly down to the Everglades and down to the Florida Bay. And this slow flow would continue even into the dry season because of how slow it's moving. And then in the early 1900s, Florida settlers drained and altered a lot of the Everglades watershed for farms and homes. Now the water flows really quickly, all the way to Lake Okeechobee, instead of moving slowly through those natural floodplains. And then when the lake gets too high, the water gets pumped out through those two rivers on either side. Now, this change in natural flow alters a lot of things negatively in terms of Florida's nature. Some examples are that on the coast where saltwater fish tend to grow up, all those little areas are getting scoured by freshwater coming in. On the flip side, down in the Everglades, there's not as much freshwater coming into the Everglades, which means saltwater is starting to move in there. So the Everglades system is changing entirely. So how fast water flows and where it flows can change every aspect of Florida's natural systems. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So water quality issues in Florida are partly the result of heavy fertilization on farms and home planting. Even things like gardening and landscape along the coast have an effect. And this process has led to a buildup of phosphorus. Phosphorus is like a nutrient. It's much like food for plants, but plants can only take up so much of this nutrient, much like we can only take up so much food at any given time. The rest of that is left in the water or in our soils. It's that buildup of that nutrient phosphorus in our soils and in our water that causes a lot of those green algae blooms that we see every summer. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. But we do have some solutions for this, and a lot of it has to do with slowing the flow. We can help restore the natural flow of water in the state. And we've partnered with the South Florida Water Management District with the assistance of 14 different ranches here in this area to help with that slow of the flow. By keeping water on ranch lands during the wet season, we use these water control structures, which you can see a photo of right there. And Archbold monitors these structures. We take lots of measurements and collect data, and we send that to the South Florida Water Management District. And this process helps us slow the flow of water and helps keep those nutrient levels at lower levels because the nutrients have a longer time to get absorbed by the plants. And the ranchers do get paid to help restore these more natural water movements. That way it makes that relationship between the private business and these government agencies, it's a lot more beneficial for everyone. You can go on to the next slide. And all these water control sites you can see dotted along that map there, they're all part of the Northern Everglades Payment for Environmental Services project. It's a pretty long name, so we just call it NEPES. And they help to control that water flow. It's beneficial for our coastal waterways, as long as providing long-term water for the ranchlands during the dry season. This increase in water allows for a longer period where grass can grow, which is good for our cows. You can go on to the next slide. And we also have a set on Buck Island Ranch of 188 acres that we have set aside, and we have planted these flood-resistant grasses. These grasses, they can be flooded for a while and they'll be okay, they'll survive. And when the canal systems flow through the ranch, we tend to flood out this set of acreage. And when the water goes through there, it slows down, it stays there for a long time. Those plants can help take up those nutrients that are bad, kind of bad in high levels, and cause those algae blooms. And then in the dry season, we will harvest that grass, which you can see in that photo with all those hay bales, and that provides feed for the cattle in the dry season. And it removes, once you harvest it, it removes all the nutrients that are in those plants that they've been taking up. So these are just two examples of how we can help slow the flow in Florida and help restore our natural waterways and make everything a little cleaner, a little nicer for everyone involved. And that's the end of that.
Awesome. Thank you. We're just scratching the surface today. I'm out here in this wetland, and we learned a little about the wetland research Archbold does and how we work with ranchers to help some of the water problems. But gosh, there's also, Archbold has a lake, there's rivers around here, there's all kinds of more stuff, but we can't fit it all into one virtual field trip, unfortunately. We should do this again at the end of the summer where I come to the same spot and I wouldn't be able to sit on the ground right here. Thank you all for coming. We're going to do a question and answer section. Before that, I just want to say thanks again. I hope everybody's staying safe. We have more of these coming up. Right now, today was listed as the last one, but because these events are so popular, we're going to do at least another 2 weeks. We just need to get the registrations up on our website. Coming this Thursday is a talk, is not one of these talks, but is a seminar about herpetology at Archbold, reptiles, and the research we're doing with them. Some of you have been putting your questions into the Q&A section. Some people have been putting them in the comments. I saw one question was, how does the hard pan form? And when you go deeper under here, all of a sudden you hit that harder layer of clay. I don't know, but Mandy, do you know the answer to that one? How does the hard pan form?
It formed a really long time ago. And once you break through it, it doesn't reform. I do know that much. I do know, yeah, it's clay and like lime. So the lime comes from old seashells and everything. And it was just part of Florida. It was created as part of Florida. And at Archbold, at the low section of our property, it's only about 2 meters down. So only about 6.5 feet from the soil down to our hard pan. It's very shallow. I know here in Okeechobee, it is also only about 4 or 5 feet to the hard pan. So it can be really shallow.
There was another question about what's further down. If you kept going past that hard pan, you'd have to go down about 300 feet, right where I am here, about 300 feet down until you got to the limestone. In other parts of Florida, limestone is right up at the surface. If you're over by Miami, you can see the limestone right there. But in this part of Florida, we're on a whole lot of sand. You gotta go down pretty far to get to the limestone. And limestone is made from the marine creatures that used to live in this area when this was under the ocean, many millions of years ago. Coral and the shells, things like that make up the limestone. If anybody ever gets crushed rock to put in their driveway, that kind of thing in Florida, and they ground up limestone to make it, you'll find all kinds of little fossils in there, ocean fossils. It's pretty cool. Oh, there was another question about elevation. I'm not sure exactly where I'm sitting right now what the elevation is, but the Lake Wales Ridge is around 100 feet in elevation, with other parts much higher. At my office at the Learning Center, that's about 130 feet of elevation. And then we have a hill on our property that goes to over 200 feet in elevation. If you drive up about 45 minutes or so, or an hour north of Archbold, the Lake Wales, the town of Lake Wales has a hill, and it's 300 feet on that hill. That's where Bach Tower Gardens is. Megan, are there any other good questions here we can ask Alan or Betsy, or Mandy?
Hey, yeah, so I want to give a shout out to everybody on the Facebook Live. We've got a question from Glenn D. Smith, and they want to know, what is your favorite thing about Archbold? What do you love about Archbold?
Alan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in on that. It's hard to say what my favorite thing about Archbold is. There's a lot of excellent stuff here, a lot of things to enjoy. I think maybe the plant diversity is one of my favorite things. There's so many neat little plants that only grow on this ridge that don't grow anywhere else, and it's not enough people appreciate that.
Dustin, what about you?
Do I get to say that Alan's my favorite thing at Archbold? You know, he's one of the people that really inspire me, because he's been coming out here almost his whole life. I've been at Archbold for the last 7 years, but then I meet someone like him who has been coming here since he was a little kid, since he was 7, and loved going out and catching snakes and stuff like that, and ended up turning it into his career, and now he is one of the scientists out at Archbold. So the people here really inspire me, especially people like Alan, who know this place like the back of their hand. So that's my answer. What about you, Mandy?
I would have to say my favorite thing about Archbold is how we host all the researchers, so we can explore some really cool questions that isn't just limited to our staff, but we have all kinds of cool people coming and answering all different kinds of questions.
Nice.
I just want to bring up that Glenn from the Facebook, Glenn Smith says that he loves the wide open spaces at Archbold. Kind of like what you're standing in, yeah. And he also asks, does Lake Annie work this way? And I think he was trying to ask about the watershed.
Lake Annie is actually pretty high in the watershed, and the water flows out of Lake Annie flowing north. So if you know this area, where Lake Annie is just a little bit south of Lake Placid, the Lake Placid in the town Lake Placid. So it flows right to Lake Placid, and then that flows to Lake June and Winter, and then that flows to Lake Istapoga. Mandy, do you want to add anything about Lake Annie from your perspective as a hydrology person?
Lake Annie is unique and very cool and different because it's a sinkhole. And so the sinkhole means that hard pan was broken down and that it's a sinkhole in the ground. And so Lake Annie actually is mostly groundwater. It does, like you said, Dustin, when you stay at the Learning Center, all the water flows north toward Lake Annie. So it does get flow from the station ridges into the lake when it rains. But it's got water right now, and nothing else does. And that's because it's a sinkhole and it's got a lot of groundwater that's feeding it. Pretty cool.
Also, Juan Olivares, he's a researcher at Buckeye Ranch. He actually an intern, sorry. He said that he would agree one of my favorite things about it are all the knowledgeable people that work and spend time visiting the station. So thank you.
I'm surprised he didn't say the dark skies.
Yeah, that too.
Juan is a big astronomy buff, and this is one of the best places in the area to see the night sky. If you look at a light pollution map of Florida, you'll notice that the northern Everglades, or the headwaters of the Everglades, is one of the, and well, the whole Everglades system there is pretty dark. Whereas a lot of Florida is lit up with cities, this is a great place to view the stars. Unfortunately, we don't have any camping at Archbold, but about 45 minutes to an hour from us is a wonderful state park called Kissimmee Prairie State Park. Beautiful, beautiful dark skies there.
All right. Zeke would like to ask, what happens if there is a drought in the wetlands, I guess?
Yeah, Mandy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we're kind of in a drought right now. We didn't get any rain for February or March. And we had a very dry year last year, and we didn't really get enough rain last year. So what's happening is you can kind of see around Dustin. Normally where Dustin's sitting, at least the ground would be wet and kind of squishy, and all of the plants would be growing up right now. Right now, what are they, Meadow Beauty, Dustin? Rexy is scientific. What's the
Yep, Meadow Beauty.
Meadow Beauty.
Are all blooming behind him. You can see that normally they bloom and the base of their plant is under the water. But right now they're like, hey, it's time, let's go. And they're trying it out. I see a lot of them really struggling with doing this right now because there's no water. So when we go through a drought, most of our plants wait. Like Dustin was saying with the berry shrimp, where they're adapted to very dry periods, and so they'll wait and to try to grow, to try to reproduce. This is the hardest on our wildlife because they're the ones that need to drink water. And so when there's no water, you know, or like the gator hole Dustin just visited is drying up, so even that resource is going dry. Where are these guys going to go to get their water? This is the hardest on them, but they'll make it through, hopefully.
Thank you, Mandy. Another question from Levi is, what would happen if we didn't have watersheds?
I'm not sure what he means by not having them.
So
He
maybe
said, what would
explain
happen if we didn't know about them?
Mhm.
What's that?
Maybe explain to him what a watershed is again. Maybe just to clarify.
Sure. A watershed is an area where all the water flows to the same place. It's a way for scientists and decision makers and city planners and all those people to have an idea of where the water's coming from and where it's moving. So there's no way to not have them. But what would happen if we didn't know about them? What if we didn't know about our watershed? Well, you could have catastrophic results if you didn't know, if you didn't have scientists out there figuring this out. Because imagine that you have someplace that's putting a lot of pollution into the water. Well, maybe there's wetlands south of that, and those animals end up getting sick. But maybe there's people living south of that, and then they're going to get sick because of it. Maybe it's going to kill all the fish in the rivers, and the people that were going to go on vacation are not going to do it anymore. But maybe it's even worse than that. There's people that get their dinner, get their food from those fish, and now they can't because the fish are dead. We have to understand our watersheds for the plants and animals, but also for our own safety, for our health, and for our economies too. Florida wouldn't be doing very well if it didn't have beautiful beaches and beautiful lakes to go fishing in, because that's why a lot of people move here and why a lot of visitors come to Florida.
Yeah, it provides a lot of ecosystem services.
Gosh, that's a tough question. That's a good one.
Very nice. So I just want to jump back to Facebook viewers now. We have another, Susan Brisk. What happens to the tortoise during wet years and during prescribed fires? Maybe or Amanda could answer that one. Could you all hear me?
Yeah, I could take over if Amanda's muted. So in fires, the tortoises just run for their burrows. And once in the burrows, they're pretty safe from fire. And in the wet season, a lot of times, not a lot of times, but enough times, their burrows actually go to that water table. So part of their burrows might actually be submerged with water. And that doesn't seem to bother the tortoises very much. They've got a place to drink. And also specialists like gopher frogs will hang out in those burrows as well where the water's at. We actually have a video of a burrow completely submerged all the way to the top of the burrow, and a gopher tortoise went in there anyways and just sat there. It was bizarre. They don't seem to care that much.
Hey, Alan, I've got a follow-up question for you. You've set lots of traps in the wetlands to see what lives in there. Can you name off a couple of the interesting things that you've seen in the wetlands?
Oh, yeah. There are some really, really cool things in the wetlands. In terms of reptiles and amphibians, there are a lot of frogs, a lot of tadpoles. There's this cool amphibian called a siren or an amphiuma, and it looks like an eel, but it's not. And they have these really strong jaws, and they can chomp on things pretty hard. And we also get lots of turtles. Actually, Amanda has a little turtle on her video right now that you can see. But a turtle that I see a lot in our seasonal wetlands are chicken turtles, actually. And they kind of specialize in those types of wetlands that get water and then dry up.
Nice. Mandy, are you back? If you're back, I know you've checked lots of wetlands too. Any cool things you've seen in them?
Oh, she's showing us the turtles.
Yeah, there's my little, that's a Florida soft shell. His name's Florida Man. And that's a yellow belly spider, and that's super neat. Yeah, we see all kinds of cool things. We sample the wetlands for wildlife, for fish and crawfish and amphibians, so they're tadpoles, and then their adult life. And yeah, we've just seen some really cool things in here. This is a little sunfish that's native to Florida. It's called a Seminole sunfish. And he eats mosquitoes. Or why did I say sunfish? He's a mosquito fish. He eats mosquitoes. And so there's a lot of really cool fish. There's the Everglades sunfish is what I was thinking of. I don't have any of those anymore. Florida Man ate them. But they're a sunfish that's only this big. And they're adapted to live in our seasonal wetlands that dry out every once in a while, which I think is really, really cool.
Thanks for showing us your turtles. Do we have time for 2 more questions or 1 more question?
Let's do it. I'm sure most people have probably taken off. So if you're still watching for this question and answer section, thank you for sticking around. Yeah, Megan, give them to us.
All righty. So Jay asks, the freshwater aquifer that most of us get our drinking water from, where does that lie in the ground? Is it in between the hardcore or between the hardcore and limestone?
The answer depends on if you've got your own well or if you're getting your water from city water. If you have your own well, it might not go all the way down to the Florida aquifer because you need to go down, it's something like 800 feet, something like that. Archbold, our well goes down, I think it's 1,400 feet, something really deep like that. So we're getting the Florida aquifer water. And the cities, like the city of Sebring, the cities around here, they're getting their water from the Florida aquifer water. But if you've got your own well, you're probably not going down that deep.
All right, and Deborah just made a comment. Deborah Pollard, she wanted to thank us, and she feels like she visited the scrub in person, and asks, when might scientists know the effects of lower carbon emissions during the last 6 weeks?
Oh, well, that's not something that Archbold would see. We do measure carbon dioxide and methane emissions on parts of our properties, particularly at the ranch. I don't think we have any projects where I am, but at the ranch where Alan is. But what she's talking about are things that, say, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, sees, where they can actually look with satellites and see what kind of particulate matter are in the skies. And they are, I mean, I've just seen the newspaper articles showing certain areas have a lot less pollution in the air because people aren't moving around. But it's outside the scope of what Archbold people are researching.
Cool. So we have a couple more questions, but it's up to you if you want to finish them or.
Let's do one more.
Okay.
I'm just walking back to my car, so for me, I've got another 10 minutes.
Great. All right. So Sabine Vandenhind asks, she says, you mentioned that fairy shrimp eggs can last for years in dry soil. And then she asks, what other critters do the same?
That's the critter I was thinking of, but there's probably are other ones. Alan or Mandy, can you help us out on this one? Anything else that's lying dormant?
Mandy, you can unmute yourself. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, I think I was hitting the button the same time you were. Lots of seeds. Seeds are very good at staying dormant until they get wet. It can stay hundreds of years. When we think about animals, I can't really think of any animals that can wait to hatch out of their shells like the fairy shrimp does. Can you, Alan?
I can't think of any that wait to hatch out of their shells, but there are a lot of animals that will stay dormant for short periods of time as long as they have some moisture. Like a lot of catfish can bury into the mud and they can stay alive until the rains come back in. And even crawfish will do the same thing. So
yeah, and like amphiumas as well, like really big sound creatures. They'll get, as long as the mud stays moist, they can just stay there until it rains again.
it's incredible because, people can be doing, construction or something on a property site and digging up soil next to a river that's not in the water, and they may dig up an amphiuma or a siren and they won't know what it is. It's pretty cool.
So my child found my wetlands.
Awesome.
Next week, I'll be coming to you from a rosemary bald. That's what I've got right behind me. That's the habitat I'm in now. So it's a type of scrub. So if that interests you, come back next Tuesday. We'll get our registration page up. Megan, I think that's probably it for time.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dustin. And so to everyone tuning in, you can check out our website at www.archbold-station.org for more resources and the schedule of Archbold's Discovery Classroom and scientific seminars. We hope to see you at future events. A huge thank you to all the participants and your amazing questions. Sorry if we didn't get to everyone. Thank you for being so patient. We'd love to hear your suggestions in a short online survey. A big shout out to Dustin for going out and exploring the scrub and the wetlands for us, and Amanda and Alan for sharing their experiences and knowledge with us while we're all staying home. We're signing out and hope to see you all next Tuesday. Stay safe.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Aw.
Yeah, he dredged my wetland. Now it's just a big muck pile.